Behind the grocery store, my stepmother's voice was a cold whisper about knowing my place. My father, standing at the alley's edge, just said, "Don't start, Elena," before turning his back on me. 17 years later, at Brayfield Foods, I slid a silver USB across the boardroom table and smiled. This time, I was the one starting it. My name is Harper Vale. I am 32 years old, and my life is a study in controlled environments. The chill of the early morning air clung to the glass and steel of the Brayfield Foods Tower, a monolith that scraped the pale, indifferent sky. Inside, the elevator was a sealed capsule, rising silently through the building's spine. It smelled of stale, cheap coffee and the faint, chemical scent of Windex from the morning cleaning crew. The air was recycled, tasteless, like everything else here. I smoothed the lapel of my charcoal gray suit jacket, my reflection a distorted ghost in the polished steel doors. Floor 28. Compliance. My domain. My office was a glass box with a view of other glass boxes. The city spread below, a grid of muted colors going about its business, unaware and uncaring. I sat, and the motion-activated light flickered on, bathing the small space in a hum of sterile, white fluorescence. My monitor glowed to life, and the first email at the top of my inbox was a corporate broadcast, its subject line formatted in the cheerful mandatory blue of company-wide announcements. A message from the board, announcing interim leadership transition. I clicked. The text was boilerplate corporate speak, full of phrases like synergistic alignment and forward-looking strategy, as Brayfield prepared for its massive merger with Ardent Grain. Then, the name. The board of directors is pleased to announce that Elena Vale, our esteemed Chief Operating Officer, will assume the role of Interim Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately, to guide us through this pivotal transition. Elena Vale, my stepmother. The name didn't trigger a storm of emotion. Not anymore. It was more like a key turning in a lock deep inside me. A quiet, cold click. For 17 years, I had worked to build a fortress around that lock, and now the key was in her hand again. I minimized the window, the announcement's cheerful blue replaced by the muted grays of my compliance dashboards. Everything in its place, everything under control. Later, on my way to the coffee machine, the good one on the executive floor that used actual beans, I passed Board Suite B. The name was etched in silver script on a pane of frosted glass. In the faint reflection, I saw a woman in a perfectly tailored suit, her hair pulled back in a severe knot, her expression unreadable. I saw myself. My gaze drifted down to my left wrist, where the sleeve of my white silk blouse ended. There, faint as a whisper against my skin, was a thin, silvery line of a scar. It wasn't from that day, not directly, but it had become the map marker for the memory, an anchor point. My fingers went to it, a subconscious habit, tracing the ghost of an old pressure. Harper? I flinched, pulling my hand away as if caught doing something illicit. It was Chloe, my junior assistant, her face pale with the kind of anxiety that thrived under fluorescent lights. She clutched a tablet to her chest like a shield. "They're circulating the lists," she whispered, her eyes darting down the empty, carpeted hallway. "The merger redundancies. The first wave is 12% of corporate staff. I saw a draft." She bit her lip, hesitating. "Your department is on it. Your name." It was in the column marked Potential for Strategic Realignment. Strategic realignment, a corporate euphemism for disposable. "You're on the cut list," she clarified, her voice barely audible. "Thank you, Chloe," I said, my tone even, betraying nothing. "Get back to the vendor audits for Q3. I want them double-checked." She nodded, relieved to have a task, and scurried away. I stood there for a moment longer, my reflection in the glass door now looking back at me with a new clarity. Of course I was on the list. Elena was now queen, and queens did not suffer rivals in their courts, not even ones relegated to the windowless archives of compliance. Back in my office, I slid my black leather notebook from my briefcase. It was unadorned, professional. I opened it to the first page. For years, only one sentence had occupied that page, written in my own neat, precise script. Leverage is timing. It was my compass, my creed. It had guided every choice I'd made since I was 15 years old. Every grade, every internship, every rung I had climbed on the corporate ladder to land here, in this specific company, in this specific department. It was never about climbing to the top. It was about reaching the heart of the machine, learning its gears, its weaknesses, learning where to place the wrench. The smooth, cool leather under my fingertips sent a phantom sensation through me, a memory of something else, the slick, crinkling feel of a cheap nylon grocery bag. The memory bloomed, unbidden but sharp, displacing the sterile office with the grime of the alley behind Mill Street Grocers. I was 15. The air was thick with the smell of rain on hot asphalt and rotting vegetables. Rain pattered a metallic rhythm on the lid of a large metal dumpster, a relentless, dreary drumbeat. The bag in my hand was heavy with cheap, sugary candy I'd bought with my own allowance money, a small act of rebellion, a small piece of joy that was mine alone. Elena had found me there. She didn't yell. She never did. Not in public. Her voice was low, controlled, a silken thread of venom. Her hand, nails painted a perfect blood-red lacquer, shot out and gripped my arm, not hard enough to be a visible assault, but with a biting, proprietary pressure that was all about power. Her face was close to mine, her expensive perfume cloying in the damp air. "What have I told you about this trash?" she'd hissed, her eyes on the candy. "It's common. It's beneath you. It's beneath the family name." She wasn't talking about the candy. She was talking about me, about my mother, the woman she had replaced. "It's just some candy," I'd mumbled, my face burning with humiliation. "It's about knowing your place, little girl," she'd whispered, her grip tightening for a fraction of a second. She didn't have to hit me. The humiliation was the point, the lesson. And then I saw my father, Graham Vale, standing at the mouth of the alley. He saw it all, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, his face caught in the sickly yellow glow of the street lamp. He saw her hand on my arm, my face crumpling. He took a half step forward, opened his mouth, and said the 4 words that would define the rest of my life. "Don't start, Elena." It wasn't a command to her to stop. It wasn't a defense of me. It was a plea for convenience, a request to not have a scene, to keep the peace at any cost. He looked at me, his eyes holding a pathetic apology, and then he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched against the rain. He left me there. The memory dissolved, leaving me back in the humming silence of my office. The air conditioning whispered. My screen glowed. My hand rested on my notebook. Leverage is timing. And the clock, it seemed, was about to strike midnight. My fingers went to the inside pocket of my suit jacket. They closed around a small, cool, metallic object, a silver USB drive. It was sleek, heavy, and held 17 years of patience. It held everything. I closed the notebook. My mind was clear, the cold resolve washing away the last phantom traces of the rainy alley. I opened my company calendar. The cursor blinked in a new event window. A steady, rhythmic pulse. I typed, to the Board of Directors, Graham Vale, Elena Vale. Subject. I paused. My first instinct was urgent internal audit request. Too aggressive, too obvious. It would give them time to prepare, to hide, to shred. Just then, a notification slid onto the corner of my screen. A message from an encrypted, anonymous service. I had received them before. Small breadcrumbs from someone inside who clearly knew more than they were willing to say publicly. The message was one word, followed by a sentence. Sparrow? If you unlock Sparrow, everything will be exposed. Sparrow, a name I recognized from late-night audits. A vendor flagged for irregular payment schedules. Always dismissed by upper management as a preferred partner. The final piece. The anonymous messenger had just confirmed it. I looked back at my calendar invite. I deleted the subject line. My fingers moved across the keyboard, typing a new one, a phrase perfectly coded in the bland, unthreatening language of corporate compliance, a phrase no one would question until it was too late. Subject: Vendor Integrity Review. I added the entire C-suite and the full board of directors to the invitation list. My finger hovered over the mouse, the plastic cool beneath my skin. I thought of my father's back as he walked away in the rain. I thought of Elena's perfectly manicured nails, a splash of red in the gray alley. I thought of the little girl who just wanted a bag of candy. Leverage is timing. The time is now. I clicked send. The Brayfield Foods corporate intranet homepage was a masterpiece of curated reality. This week's banner image featured Elena, front and center, surrounded by a smiling, diverse group of employees. They all wore crisp white t-shirts, emblazoned with the company's new charitable slogan in a soft, friendly font. We feed America with love. Elena's smile was radiant, her teeth impossibly white. She had one arm around a young woman from marketing and was handing a box of non-perishable goods to a man from a local food bank. The lighting was perfect, casting a warm, benevolent glow. She looked less like a COO and more like a saint of the supply chain. This was the Vale family brand, polished to a high-gloss sheen. My father, Graham Vale, occupied a similar, if less prominent, space in this corporate theater. After officially retiring, he'd been given the title of honorary advisor to the board. His role consisted of showing up at major events, collecting a generous stipend, and occasionally offering platitudes to the business media. I'd recently read an interview with him in Forbes where he spoke at length about the company's core values. At the end of the day, he was quoted as saying, his face a portrait of earnest sincerity. It's not about profits and losses, it's about business ethics. It's about leaving the world a little better than you found it. I wondered if he remembered the alley, the rain, or the look on my face. Probably not. Memories like that tarnished the brand. My place in this family portrait was, of course, non-existent. Within the company, I was an anomaly, a ghost in the machine they couldn't quite exorcise. My last performance review, signed off on by a director who reported directly to Elena, had described me as exceptionally thorough, but also rigid in interpretation of policy, and lacking the collaborative flexibility that defines the Brayfield team culture. It was a polite way of calling me a difficult bitch. The irony was that I had personally written over half of the compliance policies they now found me too rigid in interpreting. I had built the cage, and they were annoyed that I knew where all the locks were. Elena's entire public persona was constructed from this borrowed morality. She didn't just run the company, she adorned herself with its perceived virtues. There were the annual Brayfield Galas for children's nutrition, where she would stand on stage in a glittering gown and speak about ending childhood hunger. There was the Elena Vale Scholarship for Women in Business, awarded with great fanfare to a carefully selected candidate each year. It was all a performance, a way of laundering a ruthless corporate ambition through the soft cycle of philanthropy. And at every one of these events, every gala, every board luncheon, every charitable photo op, the food was provided by the same company, North Alley Catering. Their invoices were a constant, steady stream in the accounts payable ledger. The official reason was their competitive pricing and unwavering reliability. But I had seen the numbers. Their prices weren't just competitive, they were impossibly low, often undercutting market rates by 30 or 40% for high-end catering. It made no business sense, unless, of course, the business being done wasn't just about catering. The company's key performance indicators told a similar story of beautiful surfaces hiding ugly truths. On paper, Brayfield was thriving under Elena's operational leadership. Profit margins were up 7%. Market share had increased. The stock price was steady, a reassuring green line on every shareholder report. But if you dug deeper into the incident reports that I, as head of compliance, was privy to, another trend emerged, a small but persistent uptick in customer complaints. Scattered, isolated reports of food poisoning, always from products in the Cielo batch line, a budget-friendly range of prepackaged meals. Each incident was small enough to be contained. A few $1,000s in settlement money here, a coupon for free products there. The PR department, which also fell under Elena's COO purview, was masterful at handling them. The incidents were always classified as isolated contamination events and never made the news. The profit graph went up. The truth was buried in a pile of non-disclosure agreements. My nights had become a secret ritual of digital archaeology. Long after the cleaning crews had emptied the trash cans and the building had settled into a humming silence, I would work, not on the official tasks of my department, but on my own project, in a triple encrypted folder on a sandbox drive. I collected the evidence, piece by piece. The minutes from board meetings where concerns about supply chain integrity were tabled in favor of discussions about marketing budgets. The original vendor contracts with North Alley Catering, full of vague language and auto-renewing clauses, and my most precious collection, a series of screenshots, taken at 2 and 3 a.m., showing sudden, inexplicable changes to the unit pricing and delivery logs for Sparrow Logistics, the exclusive supplier for the Cielo batch line. Prices would drop for an hour. A massive order would be processed, and then the prices would revert to normal before the sun came up. It was a ghost signature, a digital tell. I was methodical, patient. I never took anything home. I never used my own network. Every file was copied to the silver USB drive I carried with me always. A cold, hard piece of my past that now held the key to my future. I wasn't entirely sure if I was invisible or just ignored. Then came Theo Marsh. He was new, a junior analyst in the finance department, quiet and observant with eyes that seemed to see more than he let on. I ran into him at the industrial-sized printer on the 12th floor, the executive level. I was there to pick up a confidential report, a legitimate one this time. The machine hummed and whirred, spitting out pages. "Harper Vale, right?" he said, his voice low, not looking at me, but at the documents he was collating. "Yes," I didn't offer more. Friendliness was a currency I didn't trade in at work. He stacked his papers neatly, tapping them into a perfect block. "I've been running the numbers on the Cielo supply chain, Sparrow Logistics." He still didn't look up. "The logistics costs don't add up. They're shipping twice the volume for half the standard freight cost. It's efficient." The way he said efficient was laced with a meaning that had nothing to do with efficiency. "The company values cost-saving partnerships," I replied, my voice flat, reciting the corporate line. He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were clear and direct. "You're going in the right direction, Harper," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The meeting you called, that's the right direction." He picked up his stack of papers and took a step closer. "A word of advice? Be careful on this floor. The security cameras have comprehensive coverage. Audio, too, near the boardrooms." He gave a curt nod and walked away, leaving me standing in the hum of the printer, the air suddenly feeling colder. He knew, or at least, he suspected, I wasn't alone. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. The inevitable email from Elena arrived the next morning. It wasn't a corporate broadcast. It was a direct message, sent only to me. The subject line was a single imperious word: priorities. The body of the email was just as concise. Stripped of all corporate pleasantries, it was pure Elena. Direct, cold, and utterly commanding. "Harper, your vendor integrity review is a distraction from the critical communication strategy required for the Ardent Grain merger. Our focus must be on a seamless public transition, not redundant internal audits. Cease this project immediately and redirect your team's resources to supporting the PR narrative. This is not a request." It was a declaration of war, disguised as a managerial directive. She was shutting it down. She knew exactly what a vendor integrity review would uncover, and she was using her newfound power as interim CEO to kill it before it could even begin. She expected me to fall in line, to be the rigid but ultimately obedient employee my file said I was. I stared at the message, at the stark black letters on the white screen. I could feel the weight of 17 years pressing down on that single moment. The alley, the rain, my father's back, her condescending whisper. My fingers moved to the keyboard. I clicked reply. My response was not a long, carefully worded argument about corporate governance or fiduciary duty. It was not a plea or a protest. It was an acknowledgement. It was a promise. I typed one word. Noted. Then I hit send. Elena's retaliation was not swift. It was instantaneous. It arrived the following morning, not as an email or a direct confrontation, but as a public execution, delivered via the sterile medium of a company-wide memo posted on the internal network. Subject: Organizational restructuring in preparation for merger. The memo was a symphony of corporate jargon, speaking of optimizing departmental synergies and leveraging core competencies. Buried in the third paragraph was the blade. To ensure a focused and robust communications strategy during this transition, Harper Vale will be temporarily reassigned to lead a special media task force, reporting directly to the VP of Public Relations. The role of Director of Compliance will be temporarily assumed by Mark Redding, effective immediately. Mark Redding, a man whose primary skills were a firm handshake and an unwavering loyalty to Elena. He was a corporate yes man, a placeholder designed to rubber stamp whatever came across his desk. I hadn't been fired. I had been neutralized. My access, my authority, my entire official capacity to investigate anything had been surgically removed and handed to a puppet. The message was clear. You are irrelevant. The second blow landed an hour later. It was hand-delivered by a nervous-looking junior from Human Resources, a crisp, white envelope with my name typed on the front. Inside was a single sheet of heavy bond paper, a formal written warning. This letter serves as a formal reprimand for a severe breach of company protocol. It began, an internal security audit has revealed that on multiple occasions within the past 2 weeks, you, Harper Vale, initiated unauthorized access to the Tier 1 vendor financial database, specifically targeting the accounts of Sparrow Logistics and North Alley Catering. This action constitutes a gross misuse of company resources and a violation of your employment agreement. Further infractions will result in immediate termination. I read the letter twice, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. It was a classic corporate kill move. Build a paper trail, create a pretext. She wasn't just neutralizing me. She was fabricating the justification to fire me for cause, denying me any severance or legal recourse. It was sloppy, it was arrogant, and it was the first mistake she had made. Because the unauthorized access had been conducted using the credentials of a temporary high-level audit account, an account that required COO-level approval to create, an account that Elena herself had personally authorized for my use a week before she was named interim CEO, back when she wanted me to run a deep-dive analysis on supply chain costs to make her look good to the board. She had given me the gun, and now she was trying to frame me for holding it. The summons came that afternoon, an email from the Internal Ethics and Conduct Committee, cordially inviting me to a meeting in Board Suite C to discuss the findings of the recent security audit. The committee, I knew, was a recent creation of Elena's, a body formed under the guise of promoting corporate integrity, but staffed exclusively with her allies. It was a show trial, and I was the star witness against myself. I walked into Board Suite C at 4 p.m. sharp. The air was thick with a tense, artificial collegiality. 3 committee members sat at one side of a long mahogany table. Mark Redding, my newly appointed replacement, the VP of HR, and a senior legal counsel who owed his career to Elena. They looked at me with expressions of feigned gravity. Harper, thank you for coming, the HR VP began, shuffling papers. We have a serious matter to discuss. The report here indicates a clear pattern of unauthorized data access. I let him speak, let him lay out the entire fabricated case. I listened patiently, my hands resting calmly on the table in front of me. When he was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. All 3 of them looked at me, expecting a defense, a denial, an apology. I gave them none of those. Instead, I slid my company-issued tablet across the polished table. It was open to a single document. "I believe you'll find the access was fully authorized," I said, my voice even and calm. On the screen was a scanned PDF of a system access authorization form. It detailed the creation of the temporary audit account, its permissions, and its assigned user, Harper Vale. At the bottom of the form, in the box marked Approving Officer, was a crisp, clear, undeniable signature, Elena Vale. The document was digitally time-stamped, dated 2 weeks prior. The silence that followed was different. The first had been expectant. This one was stunned. Mark Redding's face went slack. The lawyer picked up the tablet, his eyes scanning the signature as if he could will it into a forgery. He couldn't. It was perfect. This authorization was for a specific, limited-scope project on cost analysis, the lawyer finally stammered, trying to regain his footing. Not for a broad investigation into vendor conduct. "The authorization grants full-read access to the Tier 1 vendor database," I replied, quoting the form itself. "It specifies no such scope limitations." I was performing my due diligence as Director of Compliance, a role I held at the time. The room was a vacuum. I had not only disarmed their weapon, I had turned it back on them. The meeting was a sham, and my evidence proved it. The warning letter was baseless. Their case had evaporated. I decided to press my advantage. "Clearly, there has been a significant misunderstanding," I said, my voice hardening slightly. "Given the serious nature of these incorrect allegations and the potential conflicts of interest they reveal, I will need 72 hours to conduct a full reconciliation of the vendor accounts in question to prepare a report for the board." From the corner of my eye, I saw the door to the suite open. Elena stood there. She had clearly been listening from an adjoining office. She walked in, her heels clicking an angry staccato on the floor. She gave her committee a withering look before fixing her gaze on me. A faint, contemptuous smile played on her lips. "You don't have 72 minutes. Harper," she said, her voice a low, dangerous purr. The pretense was over. This was no longer a committee meeting, it was an execution, and the executioner had arrived. I met her gaze. "Then the matter will have to be escalated." I stood, gathered my tablet, and walked out of the room, leaving her and her stunned allies in my wake. I didn't go back to my new, pointless desk in the PR department. I went straight to my old office, where Mark Redding was already measuring the windows for new blinds. I ignored him, logged into my old terminal, my access hadn't been revoked yet, and pulled up the official vendor management portal. I typed a formal request, citing sections of the Brayfield Corporate Governance Charter that I myself had written. Request type: immediate vendor suspension, pending investigation. Vendor name: North Alley Catering. Reason: suspected conflict of interest in violation of Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the Brayfield Code of Conduct. Potential links to undisclosed related party entities. I attached the preliminary data on their impossibly low pricing as supporting evidence. It was a formal, official act. It created a record. It forced a process, even as interim CEO. Elena couldn't simply make a request like this disappear. It would have to be addressed, and the record of its submission was now permanently logged in the system. I hit send. It was 5:15 p.m. By 7 p.m., my world had shrunk. I was working late, clearing out my personal files. When I decided to get a coffee, I walked to the elevator bay and swiped my access card. The reader blinked red. Access denied. I tried again. Red. I tried the stairwell door. Red. My access had been downgraded. I was now restricted to my own floor, a prisoner in my glass box. She was locking me out. I went back to my desk, the reality of the situation settling in. I had been outmaneuvered. I had evidence, yes, but she had power. She could bury me in process, isolate me, and strip me of my resources until I was nothing more than an annoyance. I had shown my hand too early. I sat in the dark, the city lights twinkling below like a field of fallen stars. My phone screen lit up on the desk, a notification from the same encrypted messaging app, my anonymous ally. I tapped it open. There was no text this time, just a single file attachment. Sparrow, CSV. My heart hammered against my ribs. CSV, comma-separated values, a spreadsheet, raw data. I quickly and securely transferred the file to my tablet. My fingers fumbled slightly as I tapped to open it. The screen filled with rows and columns, a dizzying sea of numbers and text. But it wasn't just a list of transactions. It was a complete, unredacted ledger, dates, payment amounts, transfer routing numbers, and 2 columns that made the air freeze in my lungs. One was labeled Invoice Reference, listing payments to North Alley Catering. The other was labeled Internal Transfer Source, and every single entry in that column listed the same name, Sparrow Ridge Logistics. It was the missing link, the Rosetta Stone. This file didn't just suggest a connection between the 2 companies. It proved it. It was a direct, undeniable record of money flowing from one to the other, a hidden river of cash flowing beneath the surface of the official books. Elena hadn't just made a mistake. She had left the key in the lock. And Theo Marsh, the quiet analyst from the 12th floor, had just handed it to me. The spreadsheet was a blueprint of a crime. Under the harsh white light of my desk lamp, the rows of Sparrow, CSV, resolved into a clear, damning narrative. My screen was a sterile field of black and white, the only color the frantic beating of my own heart, a warmth that felt out of place in the cold silence of the office tower. The file wasn't just a list of payments. It was a map, showing a hidden river of money flowing from the public-facing entity of Brayfield Foods into the shadows. Every invoice number from North Alley Catering, our celebrated budget-friendly event supplier, was meticulously cross-referenced with a corresponding debit from an internal account belonging to Sparrow Ridge Logistics. It was a classic shell game. Brayfield paid Sparrow for logistical services related to the Cielo batch product line. Sparrow, in turn, used that money to subsidize North Alley, allowing them to underbid on every corporate event, making Elena look both fiscally responsible and wonderfully charitable. The catering company was a loss leader, a public relations tool funded by a logistics company that was grossly overcharging for its actual services. It was a closed loop, designed to manufacture a specific corporate image. But who owned the loop? That was the question that kept me chained to my desk until the city outside was nothing but a smear of distant, indifferent lights. I began to dig, not into Brayfield systems, but into public records, state corporate filings, business registration databases. I started with Sparrow Ridge Logistics. It was a limited liability company, an LLC, registered to a post office box in Delaware. Its ownership was shielded by another LLC, and that one by another. It was a nesting doll of corporate anonymity, designed to frustrate anyone who started asking questions. I kept digging, fueled by black coffee and 17 years of simmering patience. I cross-referenced incorporation dates with other company filings, searching for common names, common legal representatives, common addresses, and then, at 3:17 a.m., I found it, the final doll in the set. The ultimate beneficial owner of the entire chain of shell corporations was a holding company. Its name was simple, arrogant, and utterly perfect. EV Holdings. E.V. Elena Vall. She hadn't even bothered to be creative. It was a monument to her own hubris, buried under just enough legal boilerplate to be invisible to a casual observer. But I was not a casual observer. I was a cartographer of her sins. And I had just found the dragon's lair on the map. The financial crime was now clear, but I knew it was only half the story. The overcharging from Sparrow had to be justified on the books somehow. That's where the persistent, low-level food poisoning incidents from the Cielo line came in. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a symptom. Something was wrong with the product itself. My anonymous messenger provided the next piece. A new message appeared, again containing no text. It was a link to a password-protected, temporary cloud server. The password was a single word, Alley, a chilling reference to our shared past. Inside was a collection of video files. They were security camera footage, time-stamped between midnight and 4 a.m., from the loading bay of the primary Sparrow Logistics warehouse. I watched the first video. The quality was grainy, the colors washed out under the sickly orange glow of the security lights. A Sparrow truck backed up to the loading dock. Workers began unloading pallets of food products, boxes clearly marked with the logo of a low-grade, bulk discount supplier, a brand I knew Brayfield would never publicly associate with. Then, as the camera watched, the workers took the boxes to a corner of the bay, out of direct sight but still visible. When they brought them back to be loaded onto a different truck, a truck with the Brayfield Foods logo, the boxes were different. They now bore the bright, cheerful branding of the Cielo batch line. They were relabeling them in the dead of night. They were putting cheap, substandard product into our packaging and shipping it to our distribution centers. This was the source of the sickness, the reason for the payoffs, the justification for the entire financial shell game. It was fraud on a scale I hadn't even imagined. But video footage could be disputed. I needed something physical, something incontrovertible. According to building schematics and inventory logs I'd reviewed months ago, there was a long-term document storage room on the third floor of our own building. It was designated for vendor operations overflow, a corporate purgatory for old paperwork. Access was restricted, requiring a specific, gray-colored keycard issued only to the vendor ops team. My own card, even before it was restricted, was the wrong color. I sent a single, encrypted message to the only person I could trust. "I need to get into 3C, vendor ops storage. Can you help?" The reply from Theo Marsh was almost immediate. "Meet me at the east stairwell in 10. Leave your phone at your desk." The stairwell was cold, silent, and smelled of concrete dust. Theo was waiting, looking pale under the single, caged light bulb. He didn't speak. He simply held out his hand. In it was a plain gray keycard. He pressed it into my palm. "It's logged out to a temp who quit last week," he said, his voice a low echo in the concrete space. "It's a ghost card. It'll work, but it'll still log the entry. You'll have about an hour before anyone would notice the discrepancy. If they were looking, be fast. Harper." "Thank you, Theo." He just nodded, his eyes full of a gravity that went beyond the risk he was taking. "Nail her," he said, and then he turned and disappeared back down the stairs. The third floor was deserted. The vendor ops storage room was at the end of a long, dark corridor, an unmarked metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I held the ghost card to the reader. There was a soft beep, and a heavy metallic thunk as the magnetic lock disengaged. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was cold, the air still and heavy with the smell of old paper. A wave of my hand triggered a motion sensor, and a bank of long, fluorescent lights overhead flickered on, one by one, with a slow, humming buzz, like a machine taking a reluctant breath. It was a library of forgotten deals and expired contracts. Metal shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, crammed with identical cardboard file boxes. I had no idea where to start. I began to scan the labels, my footsteps the only sound in the humming silence. The boxes were organized by vendor and year. I found the section for Sparrow Logistics. It was vast. I started pulling boxes, my hands growing dusty. Most contained what I expected: shipping manifests, freight invoices, fuel receipts, all legitimate looking, all part of the carefully constructed facade. I was about to give up when I saw it. Tucked behind a row of Sparrow boxes, on the lowest shelf, was a single, different-looking box. It was newer, the cardboard still crisp. It had no official label. Instead, a single line had been stamped on its side in black, block-lettered ink. "Cielo batch, regrade." My breath caught. Regrade. In food industry parlance, it meant product that failed to meet initial quality standards, but was deemed acceptable for sale after a secondary, less stringent review. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside were not invoices or manifests. They were files, each one a thin manila folder. I pulled out the first one. It was a food safety and quality assurance report from an internal Brayfield lab. I scanned the page. It was a batch test for Cielo batch lasagna. I saw a list of microbiological counts, and next to them, a series of red-inked check marks in boxes labeled fail. But that wasn't the damning part. The damning part was next to it. A thick stripe of white correction fluid had been painted over the fail box, and stamped over the whiteout, in fresh black ink, was the word pass. Below, in the space for the lab technician's signature, was a scrawled, illegible name I didn't recognize. I flipped to the next file, and the next. It was all the same, dozens of them. Batch reports for every product in the Cielo line. All of them had failed safety tests for things like Listeria, E. coli, and Salmonella, and every single one had been manually overridden. The evidence of failure had been literally painted over, the documents falsified with a forger's stamp and a fake signature. This was it, the smoking gun, the physical proof that connected the financial fraud to a deliberate, reckless endangerment of public health. I took out my phone, my hands steady now, the cold rage a focusing lens. I began to photograph every page of every file, the snap of the digital shutter unnaturally loud in the silent room. I worked quickly, methodically, creating a perfect, high-resolution digital copy of every last piece of doctored evidence. When I was done, I connected my phone to the silver USB drive with an adapter. I transferred the encrypted photo files, placing them in a folder alongside the Sparrow CSV file, the corporate registration records for EV holdings, and the videos from the loading dock. Everything, all of it, now resting on a single piece of metal I had carried since the day I left my father's house. As I slid the USB drive back into my pocket, my phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from a new number, an unknown sender. Don't touch the Cielo batch files if you want to keep your job. The threat was clear. Someone was watching. Someone knew. They thought they could scare me, thought that the threat of unemployment was the worst they could do. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I stood there in the humming, fluorescent silence of the secret room, the cold weight of the USB drive a reassuring presence against my leg. I typed my reply, my thumb tapping the glass screen with deliberate force. My job isn't the only thing I'm keeping. My counteroffensive was not a single, desperate charge. It was a campaign, planned with the cold, patient precision of a Go master placing stones on a board. Each move was designed not for immediate victory, but to slowly, inexorably cut off my opponent's territory, to eliminate their options until surrender was the only move left. My fury was the fire in the forge, but the weapon it created was a thing of pure, cold logic. The first stone was placed on the corporate calendar. The merger with Ardent Grain was to be officially announced at a lavish press event and gala dinner on a Friday 3 weeks from now. I scheduled my resurrected vendor integrity review for 9 a.m. that same Friday, in Board Suite B. It was an act of supreme audacity, positioning my quiet little meeting as a direct prequel to the company's biggest triumph. A landmine buried directly in the path of the victory parade. They would be forced to attend, to dispense with this minor annoyance before the main event. The second stone was misdirection. A week before the meeting, I circulated a preliminary agenda and a pre-read document to all attendees. The document was a masterpiece of corporate banality, a 50-page preliminary risk matrix for supply chain ethics post-merger. It was dense, filled with impenetrable jargon, meaningless charts, and vague, non-committal recommendations. It was designed to be so profoundly boring that no one, least of all the supremely confident Elena, would read past the executive summary. It was camouflage, making my meeting look like a bureaucratic formality, a box to be ticked by the overzealous compliance girl. Let them sleep. The third stone was a digital tripwire. I filed a Level 2 request with the IT security department. I didn't mention Sparrow or North Alley by name. Instead, I framed it as a proactive security measure in light of the upcoming merger. I requested a temporary and heightened audit flag be placed on a specific list of vendor payment portals, citing the need to monitor for potential pre-merger financial irregularities. The list I provided contained 20 vendors, 17 were irrelevant decoys, 3 were Sparrow Ridge Logistics, North Alley Catering, NEV, Holdings, any transaction, any data modification, any access attempt related to them would now be logged in a separate high-security server that I, under my temporary Special Media Task Force role, had no official access to, but the flag itself was a deterrent. It was a digital ghost watching their every move. The fourth stone was psychological. I needed to capture Elena's arrogance, her dismissiveness, on record. I requested a brief phone call with her to align on messaging priorities. She accepted, no doubt eager to put her newly neutered stepdaughter firmly in her place. I took the call in an empty conference room. I didn't use a headset. I placed my phone on the large, brushed steel table and put her on speaker. The speakerphone turned her voice into a tinny, metallic weapon, every condescending syllable echoing slightly in the room, sharp as a shard of glass. "Harper, I trust you're focused on the positive narratives for the merger," she began. No preamble. "Of course," I said. "I just wanted to clarify that the vendor integrity review is still on the calendar. I assume you'll want to postpone it to avoid any distraction on the big day." It was a calculated bait. Her laugh was a dry, rustling sound. "Don't be ridiculous. That meeting is a procedural relic. We'll sit through your little presentation for 15 minutes. You'll present your meaningless data, and we'll all move on. Consider it your final act in a role you were never suited for. Now, if you're done wasting my time." I recorded every word. The audio file was a perfect encapsulation of her contempt for the very idea of oversight. The fifth stone was the most critical. I needed an unimpeachable external authority in the room. Someone who could not be dismissed, bullied, or bought. I sent an email to a man named Julian Croft. Croft was a legend in corporate law, a silver-haired shark known for his brutal, methodical litigation style. More importantly, 3 years ago, Julian Croft had represented a coalition of farmers in a landmark class action lawsuit against Ardent Grain for monopolistic practices, and he had won, a 9-figure settlement. I invited him to my meeting not as my lawyer, but as a paid, independent expert consultant to provide an external perspective on vendor ethics. The fee I offered was obscene, drawn from a discretionary budget I still controlled. His presence alone would be a declaration of war, a signal to the board, and more importantly, to the Ardent Grain executives who would surely hear of it, that this was no ordinary review. It was a legal landmine. The sixth stone was my dead man's switch. I spent a weekend drafting a formal whistleblower complaint to the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was a cold, precise document, detailing every aspect of the fraud. From the shell companies to the falsified safety reports, I included the key files from my silver USB. I then used a secure, automated service to schedule the email for delivery. But it would not be sent on a timer. It was tied to a specific digital trigger, a script I wrote that would crawl Brayfield's public-facing corporate website once every 5 minutes. The email would only be sent if the script detected a change on the leadership page, specifically, if Elena Vale's title was removed or changed, or if my own name was removed from the employee directory. If they fired me to silence me, the bomb would detonate. My silence was now their shield. The seventh stone was a quiet accumulation of power. Brayfield had hundreds of small individual shareholders, retirees, former employees, small-time investors who owned a few hundred shares each. They were routinely ignored, their votes meaningless against the large institutional investors. I spent a week tracking them down. I called them personally. I didn't speak of fraud or conspiracy. I spoke their language, of corporate responsibility, of protecting the company's good name, of the Vale family legacy. I convinced 41 of them to grant me their proxy vote, but only for a single, specific agenda item, any motion related to vendor ethics and conduct. It was a tiny sliver of power, but in a close vote, it could be the weight that tipped the entire scale. The eighth stone was setting the stage. The night before the meeting, I used a junior technician I trusted from the AV department to help me prepare Board Suite B. We calibrated the massive, wall-mounted display screen. I didn't load a PowerPoint presentation. I loaded 3 video files, queued to specific start times. Video 1. The grainy footage of the Cielo batch boxes being relabeled in the Sparrow warehouse. Video 2. A slow, scrolling montage of the doctored food safety reports, the whiteout and forged pass stamps clear as day. Video 3. A simplified, animated flowchart I'd created, showing the precise flow of money from Brayfield, through Sparrow Ridge Logistics and XOV Holdings, and into the accounts of North Alley Catering. The theater was ready. The 9th, and final, stone was for me alone. It was a single, brown manila envelope, which I placed at the bottom of my briefcase. It contained no financial data, no corporate malfeasance. It contained a single 8x10 glossy photograph. It was a still image, captured from the security camera of Mill Street Grocers 17 years ago, a camera I had tracked down and whose archived footage I had paid a retired security guard a handsome sum to retrieve. The image was grainy but clear, a woman's hand, nails painted red, gripping the arm of a 15-year-old girl in a rainy alley, my father's back, turned, at the edge of the frame. It was not a weapon for the board, it was a weapon for my father, a reminder of the day the rot truly began. It was my reserve, my dagger, held close to the heart. As I closed my briefcase, my preparations complete, I opened my black notebook to the final page and wrote one last note to myself, a final directive for the battle to come. When they ask for motive, show them the truth. No tears needed. The grand ballroom of the Brayside Hotel was a universe unto itself, a gilded bubble shimmering with the warm, golden light of chandeliers. The air hummed with the self-congratulatory murmur of 100 private conversations, punctuated by the delicate chime of crystal glasses. Round tables, draped in immaculate white linen, were set with gleaming silver and impossibly thin-stemmed wine glasses, each reflecting a miniature, distorted version of the opulent room. This was the pinnacle of the corporate world, a celebration of power and profit, the official announcement gala for the Brayfield Foods and Ardent Grain merger. It was awake, and they just didn't know it yet. Elena stood at a podium on the main stage, bathed in a soft, forgiving spotlight. She was radiant in a dark emerald gown, the picture of grace and authority. The Brayfield and Ardent Grain logos were projected on a massive screen behind her, intertwined like lovers. Her speech was a masterclass in corporate hagiography, a sermon on the noble calling of feeding a nation. "This merger isn't just about market share or shareholder value," she said, her voice resonating with a carefully practiced sincerity that filled every corner of the ballroom. "It's about a shared vision, a vision of a stronger, more efficient, and more caring company, a company that feeds America with love, with integrity, and with complete and total transparency." The word hung in the air, polished and hollow. A wave of polite applause rippled through the audience. In the front row, at the table of honor, my father, Graham Vale, sat beaming. He watched Elena as if she were a priestess at an altar, nodding along to her every word, his face a mask of paternal and professional pride. He was completely captivated by the performance, a willing member of the congregation. He had chosen his side, his belief, and he was basking in its reflected glory. I was not at a table. I stood in the shadows at the back of the room, in the elevated alcove that housed the audiovisual control boards. The air here was cooler, smelling of ozone and hot electronics. Below me, the gala was a tableau, a painting of blissful ignorance. I was separate, detached, the director in the booth, watching the final scene unfold. I glanced at the small, glowing screen of my phone. 2029. It was time to place the final stone on the board. My thumb moved, typing a short, encrypted message to Theo Marsh, who was patched in remotely, his own fingers on the digital switch. The message was the final command, the prearranged trigger. "Play clip 1 on the third mention of transparency or its variants. Go on my mark." On stage, Elena was hitting her stride, her voice swelling with passion for her grand finale. Our commitment, our promise to every American family who puts their trust in the Brayfield name, is that we will always operate with honesty. We owe them that transparency. That was the second time. The room was wrapped. The executives from Ardent Grain looked pleased. Assured that they were merging with a company of impeccable moral character, I could feel my own heartbeat, a steady, metronomic rhythm against my ribs. It was not a rhythm of fear, it was the calm, measured beat of inevitability. Elena smiled, a wide, magnanimous gesture that took in the entire room. She raised a hand as if in benediction. And that is my personal pledge. As I guide this new, unified family forward, we will be a beacon of corporate responsibility. We will build our future on a foundation of absolute transparency. That was the third time. I sent the single word to Theo. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The world remained suspended in its gilded perfection. Elena's smile hung in the spotlight. The intertwined logos glowed behind her, and then, the universe fractured. The massive screen flickered. The logos vanished, replaced by the grainy, blue-tinted darkness of a warehouse loading dock at night. The image was stark, ugly, and shockingly real. There was no sound, but none was needed. The silent video showed a group of workers in Sparrow Logistics uniforms unloading pallets of cheaply packaged, generic brand food. The video then cut to a different angle, showing the same workers hastily slapping new labels on the boxes, the bright, familiar, trusted labels of Brayfield's Cielo batch. A single, collective gasp seemed to suck the air out of the room. It was followed by a silence so profound, it was like a physical blow. Then, the whispers started. They spread from table to table, not like a ripple, but like a flash fire. A wave of hissed questions and shocked exclamations. The warm, golden atmosphere of the ballroom had been instantly contaminated by the cold, hard truth on the screen. The master of ceremonies, a local news anchor hired for the evening, stood at the side of the stage, his professional smile frozen into a rictus of horror. He fumbled with his microphone, and a high-pitched squeal of feedback tore through the ballroom, a sound of pure panic. Elena stood frozen at the podium, her face a pale, slack mask of disbelief. She stared at the screen behind her as if it were a monster that had just crawled from her own subconscious. That was my cue. I stepped out from the darkness of the AV booth and began to walk toward the stage. My heels clicked on the polished floor, the sound sharp and clear in the stunned silence. I didn't rush. Every step was deliberate. The sea of elegantly dressed guests parted before me, their faces turning from the screen to me, a mixture of confusion, outrage, and dawning comprehension in their eyes. I walked up the small side stairs to the stage and took the shrieking microphone from the MC's paralyzed hand. I signaled to the tech in the booth, who cut the feedback. I turned to face the audience, the spotlight that had so recently illuminated Elena now falling on me. "We'll be pausing the celebration," I said, my voice amplified, calm, and cutting through the chaotic whispers. "There is an urgent matter of corporate ethics to address." A chair scraped loudly against the floor. My father was on his feet, his face flushed with a furious, protective rage. The spell was broken, and his goddess was under attack. His loyalty, as always, was to the piece, to the facade. "Harper!" he boomed, his voice shaking. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" All eyes were on me. The entire room held its breath, waiting for my answer. I looked away from the crowd, away from the horrified executives, and looked directly at my father. I let him see the 17 years of silence in my eyes before I answered him. "The most important lesson you ever taught me, Father," I said, my voice dropping slightly but still carrying through the microphone, clear and cold as ice. "The one you delivered in a rainy alley. Don't start. That lesson is no longer in effect." The transition from the gilded chaos of the ballroom to the sterile silence of Board Suite B was brutal and swift. The 20-minute interlude was a blur of frantic aides, panicked whispers, and the grim faces of the Ardent Grain executives making a hasty, silent retreat. Now, There were only the essential players, seated around the long, polished mahogany table under the cold, unforgiving glare of recessed lighting. The 10 members of the Brayfield board, my father, a pale, trembling Elena, and at my side, the calm, predatory presence of Julian Croft, my invited expert. The chairman of the board, a man named Arthur Sterling, cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tomb-like quiet. Ms. Vale, Harper, this is a most unprecedented situation. You have made an extraordinary public claim. You have the floor. I didn't stand. I remained seated, a calm island in a sea of turmoil. I opened my laptop. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't waste the board's time with theatrics. My review is based on 3 core findings. I clicked a key, and the large screen at the end of the room, the same screen that had shown the warehouse video, now displayed a clean, simple flowchart. It showed 3 boxes: North Alley Catering, Sparrow Ridge Logistics, and a third, final box at the top, EHV, Holdings. Lines and arrows depicted the flow of money with brutal simplicity. This is the first finding, I said, my voice as calm and level as the lines on the screen. Brayfield Foods pays exorbitant fees to Sparrow Ridge Logistics for services related to the Cielo batch line. Sparrow, in turn, funnels a portion of that money to North Alley Catering, allowing them to operate at a loss and secure every high-profile Brayfield event. The entire structure is a closed loop, designed to launder money and create a false public image of fiscal prudence. I paused, letting the image sink in. The ultimate beneficial owner of this entire structure is a shell corporation, EV Holdings. Elena let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. This is absurd, a fantasy constructed by a disgruntled employee. There is no proof of any connection. I turned my head slightly toward Julian Croft. Mr. Croft, as an independent expert in corporate structures, would you care to comment? Croft leaned forward, his silver hair catching the light. He had spent the last 20 minutes on his own tablet, his fingers flying. I've just reviewed the public filings for the chain of LLCs that own Sparrow Ridge, he said, his voice a low, gravelly instrument of doom. It's buried deep, but it's there. The beneficial owner for EV Holdings matches the primary signatory on Ms. Elena Vale's personal financial disclosures. The connection is not just proven, it's legally indisputable. A ripple of shock went around the table. My father stared at Elena, a flicker of doubt finally entering his eyes. That's the first punch, I said quietly, clicking to the next slide. The screen now showed a high-resolution image of one of the doctored food safety reports. The whiteout was stark, the fake pass stamp glaringly obvious. The second finding concerns the why, I continued, my voice hardening. The overpayments to Sparrow needed to be justified. They were hidden within the operational budget for the Cielo batch line, a budget inflated to cover a multitude of sins. Specifically, the cost of acquiring and relabeling substandard, out-of-date product that repeatedly failed internal safety inspections for contaminants, including Listeria and E. coli. I advanced the slide again. Now it was a screenshot of an internal email, sent from Elena's COO account to the head of warehouse operations. The subject line was, Cielo Inventory. The message was short and chilling. We have an inspection next Tuesday. Push the existing Cielo stock to distribution by Friday. Regardless of the preliminary lab flags, we'll absorb any write-offs later. We need the warehouse clear and the numbers clean for the quarterly report. The room was utterly silent now. The implications were horrifying. This wasn't just financial fraud. It was a conscious, deliberate endangerment of the public. This email was sent 3 days before the first major reported outbreak of food poisoning linked to a Cielo product in the Midwest, I stated, letting the fact land like a physical blow. Elena was white as a sheet, her knuckles stark against the dark wood of the table. These documents are forgeries, she hissed, her voice thin and brittle. She's fabricated all of this. It's a pathetic, vindictive attack. Which brings me to my third and final finding, I said, ignoring her completely. I changed the slide one last time. It was a block of text, highlighted in yellow. It was Section 9, Subsection C, of the signed letter of intent for the Ardent Grain merger, the Ethics Clause. I read it aloud. Should a pre-merger due diligence review reveal evidence of material fraud, conflicts of interest, or gross negligence directly involving a member of the Brayfield Foods executive leadership, any and all temporary appointments made in anticipation of the merger, including that of the interim CEO, shall be immediately and automatically nullified. Checkmate. The room understood. Ardent Grain had protected themselves. The very power Elena was using to try and destroy me was contingent on a lie she thought she could conceal. A convenient, but fake, collection of documents, Elena repeated, trying to rally, to project an authority she no longer possessed. You have no way to prove any of this is real. On the contrary, I said. I pulled the small, silver USB drive from my pocket. It glinted under the lights. I walked to the head of the table and plugged it directly into the port on the central console. The screen flickered, and a file directory appeared. This drive contains the original files for everything you've just seen, I explained, my voice cold and clinical. The security videos from the warehouse have embedded, unalterable metadata, including GPS coordinates and server-verified timestamps. The digital photographs of the forged lab reports have cryptographic hash values that are a perfect match for the originals, which are currently under seal with Mr. Croft's office. The email from your account, Elena, contains a header that traces its exact path from your terminal through the Brayfield servers. It's all here. It is all verifiable. It is all real. The fight went out of her. Her shoulders slumped. The facade had shattered, and there was nothing left but the ugly truth. Then, I walked to the end of the table where my father sat. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the brown manila envelope. I didn't open it. I simply slid it across the polished surface until it stopped directly in front of him. He looked from the envelope to my face, his own filled with a dawning dread. He knew this was different. This wasn't for the board. This was for him. He opened it. He slid out the single, glossy photograph. His breath hitched. The image was grainy, but the story it told was perfectly clear. The rain-slicked alley. The younger Elena, her face a mask of cold fury, her red-nailed hand a claw on my younger self's arm, and his own back, turned, walking away. "Harper, please," he whispered, his voice cracking, his eyes pleading with me. "Stop this. Please, just stop." I looked at him, not with hatred, but with a profound and finality. The little girl who had waited for him to turn around was gone forever. "This is the last time," I said, my voice low but carrying across the silent table, "that I will ever hear you say those words." Arthur Sterling, the chairman, seemed to age a decade in 10 seconds. He picked up the small wooden gavel in front of him. "A motion is on the floor," he announced, his voice heavy, "to vote on the immediate revocation of Elena Vale's appointment as interim chief executive officer, pending a full internal and external investigation. All in favor?" Hands went up around the table. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 against the old guard, Elena's loyalists. It was a tie. The room held its breath. "Mr. Chairman," I said clearly, "I hold the proxy votes for 41 individual shareholders. To be cast on any motion pertaining to vendor ethics, I cast all of those votes in favor of the motion." Sterling nodded grimly. The math was simple. My small collection of proxies had just broken the stalemate. "The motion carries," he declared. 7 in favor, 2 against. He brought the gavel down. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. In that exact moment, I felt a subtle vibration from my phone in my pocket. My dead man's switch. The script had detected the change. The vote had triggered it. The automated report, containing everything on the USB drive, was at that very moment being delivered to the Securities and Exchange Commission and to the personal inbox of the CEO of Ardent Grain. The ethics clause had been activated. The merger, as it stood, was dead, and so was Elena's career. It was over. The sound of the gavel's crack lingered in the air, a definitive, final punctuation mark on a sentence that had been 17 years in the writing. The immediate aftermath was not rage, but a complete and utter deflation. Elena, who had been a creature of pure, coiled power just moments before, seemed to shrink in her chair. The fight was gone, replaced by the raw, ragged edge of ruin. Then, her voice, when it came, was not a roar of defiance but a shattered, broken thing. Her eyes, wild and swimming with a desperate, self-pitying venom, found mine across the table. "I did it for this company," she rasped, her voice cracking, each word a shard of glass. "I did it to save your father's legacy from his own weakness. I did it so there would be a company left to pay your salary, you ungrateful little girl." The accusation was so pathetically self-serving, so perfectly in character, that I felt a surge of something colder and harder than anger. It was pity. "No," I said, my voice quiet but cutting through her broken sobs. I clicked a key on my laptop. The screen behind me changed again, displaying the consolidated balance sheet for EV Holdings. A single line item was highlighted in red. A 7-figure commercial loan from a private equity firm, personally guaranteed by Elena Vale. The due date was 1 week from today. "You didn't do it to save the company," I stated, letting the board see the numbers for themselves. "You did it to service your own debt. Sparrow was a private pipeline, siphoning money from Brayfield to keep your personal holding company solvent. The merger, and the stock payout that came with it, wasn't about saving a legacy, it was about saving yourself." A choked sound came from beside me. It was my father. He was staring at the screen, then at Elena, a look of profound, dawning horror on his face as he finally understood the depth of the betrayal. But then, his expression shifted into something else, something ancient and full of a pain I didn't recognize. He held up a trembling hand, his eyes finding mine. "Your mother," he began, his voice a hoarse whisper. The whole room leaned in, sensing a deeper story was about to unfold. Before she got sick, she wanted to sell the company. She was tired of it. She said the business was eating our family alive. She had a buyer lined up. He took a ragged breath, the confession tearing something open inside him. "I couldn't do it. It was my father's company. Elena was the one who convinced me to fight her on it. She was the one who saved it. She kept it in the family." The revelation hit the room like a shockwave. It recontextualized everything. His weakness, his deference to Elena, his willful blindness. It was all rooted in this single foundational betrayal of his first wife. My mother. In his twisted narrative, Elena wasn't the villain who had corrupted his company. She was the savior who had preserved it. For a moment, the old, 15-year-old version of me wanted to scream at him, but I didn't. I had one more piece of the past to share. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my personal phone. I unlocked it and opened my old, archived email account. It took me a moment to find it, a message buried for over a decade. "My mother was a meticulous planner," I said, my voice soft now, speaking as much to myself as to the room. "She knew she was sick. She knew she was leaving me behind, and she left me this." I turned the phone around for the table to see. It was an email, dated from the year she died. The recipient was my own email address. The subject line read, "For someday," but the email was still in her drafts folder. She had never hit send. "It reads," I said, my voice steady, reading her words aloud for the first time. "My dearest Harper, if you are reading this, it means you went looking for it. And if you went looking, it means you need it. There will be people who tell you that silence is strength, that peace is worth any price. They are wrong. Your voice is your own. The truth is your own. If the day ever comes that you need to speak it, don't you dare be silent, not for anyone." I placed the phone on the table. The unsent words of my dead mother seemed to suck all the remaining air out of the room. This was never just about a rainy alley. It was about a promise I never knew I had to keep. A loud, wrenching sob tore from Elena's throat. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. It was the first time I had ever seen her cry, a complete and total unraveling. But as I watched her, a cold clarity settled over me. Her tears were real, I was sure, but they were the tears of a gambler who had lost, not of a person reckoning with the harm they had caused. Tears were not evidence, they were not restitution. Arthur Sterling, the chairman, finally found his voice. He looked around the table, his face grim. The board has its decision. We will now discuss the terms of Ms. Vale's immediate termination and our legal obligations regarding criminal prosecution. This was the moment, the point where revenge could curdle into simple, brutal punishment, but that was never the goal. Mr. Chairman, I interjected, and every eye turned back to me. If I may. He nodded. I don't need Elena Vale in prison to feel vindicated, I said clearly. I don't need my father to face public humiliation. My happiness is not dependent on their punishment. I paused, letting my words sink in. What I need, and what this company needs, is for the truth to be officially acknowledged and stamped into the permanent record, and we need to make right what they made wrong. Julian Croft, who had been silent through the entire emotional exchange, leaned toward me. Harper, he said, his voice a quiet rumble. What are your demands? I slid a single sheet of paper from a folder and placed it in the center of the table. It contained 3 simple lines. First, I said, the immediate and permanent termination of Elena Vale from all positions within Brayfield Foods, and the dissolution of her severance and pension package. Second, the permanent blacklisting of Sparrow Ridge Logistics, North Alley Catering, and all their known affiliate entities. All existing contracts are to be rendered null and void. And third, I concluded, my voice ringing with a clarity that felt absolute, the establishment of a $10 million victims' compensation fund, administered by an independent third party, for any and all customers affected by the contaminated Cielo batch products. The fund will be publicly announced and named the Sparrow Relief Fund. There was a long silence. The board members looked at each other. My terms were not about revenge. They were about cleansing the company. They were about justice. It was a path forward, a way to cauterize the wound and begin to heal, not just for me, but for the entire organization and the public it had betrayed. Arthur Sterling picked up the sheet of paper. He read it once more, then looked at me, a new respect dawning in his tired eyes. He took a pen from his jacket pocket. I see no issue with these terms, he said. He signed his name at the bottom of the page. He then passed the paper to the board member on his left. One by one, they signed. The paper moved around the table, a silent testament to the new reality. It came to my father. He looked at the photo of the alley, then at the paper. His hand shook so badly he could barely hold the pen, but he signed it. Finally, it was placed before Elena. She didn't even look at it. Her lawyer simply took the pen and signed on her behalf. The document, now covered in signatures, was passed back to me. The wet black ink gleamed under the harsh lights of the boardroom. It looked like streaks of rain on a windowpane, each signature a final, permanent drop in a storm that had begun so long ago. They put us in a fishbowl. It was a small, internal conference room on the executive floor, walled on 3 sides with floor-to-ceiling glass, the kind of room designed for transparency, but which only ever felt like a display case. The light from the ceiling panels was a flat, shadowless white, the kind of light that bleaches color from the world and reveals every flaw. In the center of the room was a single, brushed steel table. It was cold to the touch. Elena sat opposite me. She had been stripped of her entourage of lawyers and aides. She was alone. The vibrant emerald of her gown from the gala now looked garish and out of place in this sterile environment. Her makeup was a little smeared. For the first time, she looked her age. The steel surface of the table was a perfect dark mirror, reflecting a distorted, wavering image of her face, the slash of her red lipstick looking like a wound. We sat in silence for what felt like a long time. The only sound was the faint, ever-present hum of the building's ventilation system, its quiet, mechanical breathing. She was the one who broke it. Her voice barely a whisper. Not directed at me, but at the empty space between us. I did stop, she said, her gaze fixed on the table's reflection of her own mouth. That harshness, with you, I stopped a long, long time ago. After a while, it wasn't necessary. It was a pathetic olive branch, a desperate attempt to recategorize 17 years of calculated emotional warfare as a temporary, long-past transgression. She wasn't apologizing. She was negotiating the terms of her own history, hoping for a treaty I had no intention of signing. I didn't answer with words. I reached into my briefcase, my movements slow and deliberate. I took out the brown manila envelope. The paper felt rough and unsubstantial in my hands. I pulled out the 8x10 glossy photograph and placed it face down on the cold steel. The silence in the room deepened, becoming heavy, expectant. Then, with a single finger, I slid the photograph across the table. It glided over the smooth surface, silent and frictionless, until it came to rest directly in front of her. She looked at it, confused for a moment, then she slowly turned it over. I watched her face. I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes, then the sharp intake of breath, the blood draining from her cheeks, leaving her skin looking like old parchment under the clinical lights. It was all there, the rain, the alley, the fear on a 15-year-old's face, her own hand, the nails a flash of red, caught in a moment of absolute, ugly power. I stopped, she had said. My voice, when I finally spoke, was low and devoid of any emotion. It was a simple statement of fact. I didn't. Her eyes were locked on the photograph. One of her hands rested on the table, and I saw her index finger begin to tremble, a tiny, uncontrollable tremor against the cold, unyielding steel. The image in front of her was not an accusation, it was a mirror, showing her not the powerful COO, not the society philanthropist, but the petty tyrant in a back alley. It was the seed from which all of this had grown. I leaned forward just slightly. That day, I said, my voice cutting through the humming silence, my father saw what you were doing, and he told you, don't start. He chose peace over me. He chose his comfort over his daughter. I let the words hang in the air for a beat. Today, I'm finishing it. Her gaze finally lifted from the photograph and met mine. Her eyes were hollowed out, dark pools of ruin. The last of her fight, the last of her righteous indignation, was gone. All that remained was the stark, simple truth of her defeat. You won, she whispered, the words barely audible, a final, ragged exhalation of surrender. I stood up, the legs of my chair making a soft scraping sound against the floor. I looked down at her one last time, a stranger in a ridiculous dress, reflected in a steel table in a glass box. No, I said, you lost. I turned and walked to the door. I didn't look back at her. I didn't look at the photograph. My hand closed around the cool metal handle of the glass door. As I pulled it open, there was a soft hiss of displaced air, the sound of the room's seal breaking. It sounded like the final, weary breath being released at the end of a long and violent storm. Outside the door, in the corridor, a small group of people was waiting. Arthur Sterling was there, along with the company's chief legal counsel and a woman from Human Resources. The lawyer was holding a thick white envelope, the termination papers. They were a silent, grim-faced honor guard, waiting to escort the queen from her castle. They all looked at me, their expressions unreadable, but I didn't meet their gaze. My business in that room, and with the woman inside it, was finished. I walked past them without a word, my footsteps echoing faintly on the marble floor of the empty corridor. I did not turn around. I did not look back. The elevator descended in a silent, controlled drop, a mirror of my own carefully managed composure. When the doors opened onto the grand, marble-floored lobby, it was a different world from the one I had entered that morning. The bustling energy of the workday was gone, replaced by the hushed, cathedral-like emptiness of a building after hours. The only sounds were the soft echo of my own footsteps and the rhythmic drumming of rain against the vast panes of glass that formed the tower's mayor's entrance. The city outside was a watercolor painting bleeding in the downpour. The headlights of the few passing cars were long, golden streaks, and the neon signs of distant buildings dissolved into soft, hazy coronas of light. The rain fell in straight, silver threads, washing the grime from the city, washing the world clean. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, not into the city street, but onto the covered portico that arched over the entrance. The air was cool and smelled of wet stone and clean. Rain-scoured air. The city's roar was muted here, a distant, rushing sound like the ocean. I walked to the edge of the covered space, where the wind sent a fine, cold mist swirling around my ankles. For a long moment, I just stood there, watching the rain fall. Then, slowly, I extended my left hand, palm up, beyond the shelter of the roof. The cool drops of rain spattered against my skin. They traced the faint, silvery line of the old scar on my wrist, pooling in the slight indentation before running down my arm. It was a ghost touch, a baptism. I watched as the rain washed over the mark, and then I curled my fingers inward, closing my hand into a fist, capturing a single cold drop of the storm. My phone, tucked deep in my suit pocket, vibrated. I pulled it out, my other hand still clenched. There were 3 new notifications on the lock screen, 3 final, definitive keystrokes in the story. The first was an official email from the legal department of Ardent Grain. The subject line was succinct. Merger agreement. The body of the message was brief, formal, and everything I had worked for. Following the unforeseen leadership changes at Brayfield, they confirmed their intention to proceed with the merger under the revised terms discussed. The final line stated that the initial deposit into the newly established Sparrow Relief Fund had been authorized. It was done. It was real. The second was a breaking news alert from the Wall Street Journal. The headline was stark, stripped of all emotion. Brayfield Foods ousts CEO Elena Vale. Amid conflict of interest scandal, anonymous whistleblower prompts major restructuring. I was a ghost, a phantom who had walked the halls, rearranged the pieces, and vanished, leaving only the consequences in my wake. My name was nowhere. My victory was absolute. The third notification was a text message. It was from my father. There were only 2 words, a lifetime of cowardice and regret distilled into a single, pathetic plea. I'm sorry. I stared at the words on the screen. The apology I had starved for as a child. The one I had raged for as a teenager. The one I had coldly dismissed as an adult. Here it was. And I felt nothing. It was a key for a lock that no longer existed. A balm for a wound that had already scarred over. His atonement was his own journey, and I was no longer waiting at the destination. I did not reply. I slid the phone back into my pocket. I then reached into my other pocket and took out the small, silver USB drive. It felt heavy in my palm, dense with the weight of data, of secrets, of 17 years of focused, patient rage. It had been my sword and my shield. Now, it was just a piece of metal. Its purpose was served. I put it away, letting it settle into the darkness of my pocket. I closed my eyes. I took one. Slow, deep breath, inhaling the cool, rain-washed air. I held it for a beat, and then I let it out. A long, quiet sigh that carried with it the last of the tension, the last of the fight. There was no surge of triumph. There was no need for applause in the empty lobby, no cheering crowds. The silence was the victory, the quiet, the stillness, the simple, profound end of the war. That was the prize. I turned my back on the rain and walked toward the building's main revolving door. As I stepped through it, pushing it into its slow, deliberate rotation, I didn't look back at the gleaming, empty lobby of the company I had just torn apart and saved. The door continued its circular journey behind me, slowing, until it came to a soft, final stop. A single, silent thought bloomed in the quiet of my mind, a final, internal declaration that needed no witness. This time, I started it, to finish it. Fade to black, cut to credits. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to see where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below to say hello and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to the channel, like this video, and consider supporting it further by hitting the hype button. Your support helps ensure that stories like this can be heard by many more people.